Welcome back, everyone. Dan Vega here, Spring Developer Advocate at VMware. Today, we're going to take some data from an existing application and we're going to try and bring it into a Spring Boot application. The way that we're going to do it is we're going to read some JSON data. We're going to use the object marshaller from Jackson to be able to read that JSON data in and then somehow transform that into something we could read in our application and put it into a database. Now, if you've been around the channel for a while, you might be thinking to yourself, wow, I've seen that before. Yes, you have. 6 years ago, I just looked it up. 6 years ago, I did a similar video to this, but that was, again, a long time ago and running on Spring Boot 1.5. So here we are on 3.2 almost, which we'll use 3.2's milestone one today. And the reason I'm doing this is because I'm working on a bunch of tutorials around getting some data into a GraphQL API. I thought this was a really good example on how to create some data. So we're going to take some data from my personal blog. If you want to follow along, you can, danvega.dev. I have a GitHub repo for this. You can actually pull the repo down and do exactly what I'm doing. I have went ahead and run the application locally on my machine, and that gives us the website. It's up and running. But what it also gives us is the ability to explore the GraphQL playground. And so I'm using GraphQL in my localhost or in my personal website. And so now I can run a query against some of the data on my blog. So I'm running a query called all posts. I'm limited it to 100. I figure I just need, some data. We use the cursor connection specification. So if you're, paying attention to Spring for GraphQL, this might look a little familiar now. So we get back some edges. Inside the edges, we get the thing we actually care about. In this case, the node is the post. And the post has things like ID, title, slug date, time to read. Tags is going to be an array of things like titles, so Spring Boot, Spring, Java, etc. So if we go ahead and run this query, again, this query will be in the source code, which will be linked in the description below. If you run this query on the playground, you should get 100 records back, and it's going to give you the data in a format that GraphQL returns, right? So we have data, all posts, edges, and then each of the edges. So there's an array of edges, and each of the edges has a node, and the node is the data that we care about. So somehow I want to take all of this data, put it into a Spring Boot app, and then try to read that into a format that we care about. So go ahead and do yourself a favor and copy this or copy it from the README in the description below. And let's take this to a new Spring Boot app. So I'm going to head over to start.spring.io and we're going to create a new project. I'm going to choose Maven. I'm going to choose the latest and greatest 3.2, which is currently the milestone 2. And we're going to fill in some data. So I'm going to say dev.danvega. We'll call this a blog demo because I think I already have a blog. So you can just call it blog if you want. And we need to pick a few dependencies. So this is going to be a web application. I'm going to use Spring Data JDBC just to talk to the database. We're going to be mixing that throughout some of these examples. I know I want to look at the new REST client and the new JDBC client. So we'll play with those dependencies, but for now that's good. So with that, I need a database. I'm going to choose H2. Again, you could go the route of like Postgres and that Docker Compose module support. But this is a really good start for now. So I think this gives us everything we need. We just need to read in some JSON data, stored in a database. This should give us exactly what we need. So I'm going to go ahead and generate this project. We are going to create a zip file. I will go into this folder and I will go ahead and open this up in my IDE. I'm using IntelliJ. You can obviously use whatever whatever IDE or text editor you're most productive in. So right away, I'm going to take that file that I created. I'm going to go to source main resources. I'm going to create a directory called data. And inside directory, I'm going to create something called blog posts.json. And I'm just going to copy that in. So this is the start of our application. We have some data. I need to figure out how can I get this into a format that I care about. I just care about posts, right? So let's think about that. All right, so the first thing that I need to think about is how I'm going to model the data in my application. And if I'm looking at this node, a post really has an ID, title, slug, date, time to read, and tags. So I'm going to go into my Java application. I'm weird. You guys know this by now. I just like to rename this to application. That's okay. And then I'm going to create a new package here called post. So I've been playing around with different ways that we can kind of organize our code. You want to organize it package by layer, package by feature. We'll use a package by feature here just to show some difference. So I'm going to create a new class in here. I'm going to call this post, and this is going to be a Java record. And if we look at our data here, we see that we have things like ID, title, slug, date, time to read, and tag. So I need to model my data off of that. So I'm going to go ahead and create an ID that is a string, a title, a slug, and you see Copilot here is helping me out because I've already written this code once, but that's okay. We're going to do it together. We want a local date for the date. We also need a time to read. And then I'm just going to use a string for the tags. I'm really just going to store it as a comma separated value. So like Spring Boot, comma, Spring Data, right? You could obviously create some relationships. I'm just going to keep this a little bit simple for this version. So that's what we need. Now I like to go ahead and put these on separate lines. So put record components on separate lines because we are using Spring Data JDBC here. We're going to have to do a couple things. One, I'm going to go ahead and mark the ID with the ID annotation. And two, I need to add an @version. And this is going to be an integer version. And again, if you want to go ahead and check out some videos I've done on Spring Data JDBC and why I might want to use that, I have some on my channel. I have some previous videos on my channel. So now that I have that, I also need let's go Java class. Let's create a post repository. And this is going to be an interface that extends the list CRUD repository, uses the type post, and the ID type in our case is string. So that gives us everything that we need there. I'll need a way to quickly list out all of the posts. So I'm going to create a quick post controller. This is going to be a REST controller. It's going to have a request mapping of /API/posts. And that will get us a good start. I need a get mapping. It needs to be there. And we're going to return a list of posts. And we'll call this find all. To do so, we need that post repository. So I'm going to say post repository dot. And this feature in IntelliJ is really nice because it says, oh, you need a post repository. I should probably auto wire in one for you. And yes, that's exactly what I want you to do. Because you can go ahead and do that. Now I have a post repository that is given to us through constructor injection. And now we can go ahead and return whatever that returns, right? So that is a really good start. That's kind of the nuts and bolts of our application to model out this, all right? Now what we need is a way to read this data in. So somewhere I have to read this data in and then, map it to a post record and then take that data and persist it to a database. So to do so, I can do so right in the application, but I'm going to create a new class. I'm going to call this my data loader. And what this is going to do, it's going to implement the command line runner. When we do that, we want to implement the run method. And this is where we can go ahead and first off, read data and then insert it into the database. So to insert into the database, I'm going to need that post repository. So we're going to add a constructor parameter for that. I'm also going to need something called an object mapper, and we'll call that object mapper, and we'll also grab that through a constructor parameter. This is from Jackson, and this is going to give us the methods we need. It provides functionality for reading and writing JSON, either to and from basic POJOs, in our case, a record, so that'll work out great, or to and from general purpose JSON tree model, a JSON node. So these JSON nodes are important because if you don't have everything exactly lined up, you can always just return a JSON node. So if you want to, I would recommend taking a look at that class and see what that's all about because we will use it today. All right, so let's start off by reading that file. So to do so, I'm going to use a try with resources here. I'm going to say I need an input stream. So input stream. And to read that in, I'm going to use type reference from the Spring Framework ASM package. So type reference, and I'm going to say class, and I'm going to say get the resource as a stream, and then we're going to pass in the name of the resource. In our case, it is data / blog posts.json. So with that in place, now I can say good, and we can try and read it. So I'm going to use the object mapper, and I'm going to read a value. So the value is now, can I pass in an input stream? We have one of those. I have an input stream. And then the what is the return type? What do we want to get back from this? So in this case, if we had a one-to-one mapping to a blog post like this, then we could easily just say, hey, map this to a post, right? But in this case, what I want to get back is a whole bunch of nodes of data, and I'm not really sure. I don't have a record called data. I don't have a record called all posts that contains an array of edges. Like, I don't have this data set up to completely map to this structure, and that's okay. A lot of the time that's going to be the case. The only thing I care about here is a post, right? So what I want to get back here is the JSON node. And again, that will allow us to kind of traverse that and do some things with it. So what I want to do is I'm going to use this outside of here. So I'm going to say JSON node is JSON, and let's go ahead and set that equal to that. Okay, we want to catch an exception here. So catch, let's say, an IO exception. And if that happens, we'll just say throw new runtime failed to read JSON data. All right, so far so good. We are reading our file. If we've read everything in okay, we should have a JSON object. Now what I want to do is I want to basically get the edges. So let's go back to our data. I want to say, hey, here are the edges. This is an array of objects, right? So I want all of the edges so that I can basically iterate over those and do some things with that. So I'm going to say, let's say, how can we do this? So I may want to create a method to do this. So let's say we're going to get another JSON node edges. We'll call this get edges. And then we can go ahead and create that method. All right. So this is going to take a JSON node. It knows how to get the edges. Now I want to check to make sure that the edges are there. So I want to do some checking on the data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to return an optional of nullable just in case there is an issue. And you can see I'm getting some assistance there because again I've done this before. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, try to get data, try to get all posts, try to get edges. If you can't do all of those things, throw an illegal argument exception. That JSON that you're passing to me is an invalid JSON object. Again, I want data, all posts, edges. The edges are what I care about. I want to get that back. So that will get us everything we need. And from there, we can say, I don't want to actually save anything yet. Let's come back. So we could say, hey, for every edge in edges, let's do something. And let's just create a variable here. Let's say list of posts is equal to new array list, right? So let's do that. And then what we can do here is we can just say posts.add, and then we need to basically create a post from that edge. Because again, that edge is going to return to us this object, which has a node in it, which has all the fields in it that we care about. So as you can see here, I want to create a post from a node and pass in the edge. So let's go ahead and create a method that does that for us. And then in here, we need to go ahead and do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, again, create a JSON node. I'm going to call this node, and I'm going to say edge.get, and then I'm getting the node. And then, wow, we got some, well, we got most of the way. Let's come back here for a second. So we get the ID title. This is all wrong. So this was Copilot trying to figure out exactly what I want. So I do need a slug. I do need a date. I need a time to read. And I need a tags. And that's pretty good, right? So, and actually we might have to fix this one. Let's fix this one. So I need a way to get the tags. Let's call this extract tags, and we're going to pass in the node. And the extract tags method is really just so that we can get the tags as a simple comma delimited string. So how can I do that? I'm getting that node in. I don't need to, do I need to get the, no, I think that node is just going to be passed in so we can, oh yeah, I guess so. What we'll do is, wow, this is really good. So we're going to return that. So again, we're using JSON node to just get at the JSON. We want to get the tags. We're creating a string builder because we're going to basically create a comma separated list of all the values. Because again, we could have multiple tags for each blog post. So that's pretty good. That's giving me what I want. So now what I need to do is create a new post from that. So I can pass in ID, title, slug, local date, parse. Yes, that looks good. Time to read, tags, and then the version will be null. Wow. Okay. Copilot is remembering things. I love to see it. So this looks pretty good. Again, we're not saving into a database yet. I don't want to. All I want to do is I want to, let's output all of the posts in our system. And then, okay, to make this run, this is a command line runner. Again, we need to go ahead and mark this with an @ component. And then the run method will get run after the application context has been created. So good, we'll get the things that we need and as the application has started. So we should see in the console that we have read all of this data and that we have a new list of posts. So let's go ahead and cross our fingers and go ahead and run this and see if this works. Nope, didn't work. That's okay. I love errors. We get to figure out what's going on. So cannot invoke com.faster XML Jackson databind JSON node as text because what is returned is null. Okay, so let's find out where that's happening. That is as text. So we are getting a string ID, string title, string slug. We are getting the local date. So that's a node.get date. Okay, I think this is because this time to read. Oh no, that should be right. Okay, I think that this needs to be title. So let's try and run that again. Okay, so now we have a list of posts. So we have 100 posts in there, and now we can go ahead and persist them off to a database. So how do we do that? Well, we have our post repository. So now we can basically just swap out this line with post repository.save all. And we're going to pass in our posts. Now there's a problem here. We have an H2 database and we haven't set up a schema yet. So we're going to need to set up a quick schema and we're going to need to set up a few properties. So I'm going to go into resources. I'm going to create a new file. We'll call this schema.sql. For time's sake, I will go ahead and paste in our schema. So again, that's ID, title, slug, date, time to read, tags, version, and the primary key is an ID. So with that in place, I also want to just go ahead and set a few properties in application.properties. So we're setting a data source to the data source name to blog, and we're enabling the H2 console so that when we start our application, we can go take a look at the database. Cool. Everything looks good. We have the H2 console available. Let's head over to the browser and check that out. Okay, I'm going to connect to that database. We see our post table here. I'm going to select star from post, and there you go. We have our 100 rows in the database. So 100 rows. You can see we have our IDs, titles. Here's our slugs, dates, time to read, tags, and the versions will all be 0 because that was the first time that we were inserting it. Cool. So that is really what I wanted to show off. That is kind of the basis for a couple of the tutorials I have upcoming that we're going to use. So we took a look at being able to copy some data from an existing data source, i.e. my blog. And this doesn't really align to things that I want to use in the application. So we had to figure out a way to map it, right? We had to read that file in. Again, we're using the get resource as stream here. We're reading in that JSON data, and then we're using Jackson to map that. So we're calling the read value. One of the overloaded methods takes an input stream and then a return type, and the return type in our case is a JSON node. So now we can just kind of get at the different nodes in that JSON data. And so we went through there, we looped over every single edge, that is basically every blog post, and we mapped them. We mapped that data, that object, to a post record. And when we had a list of posts, we could now go ahead and persist those off to the database. So cool. I hope that was fun. Again, if you have questions like this, or if you're doing things like this in your everyday workflow, let me know. I thought this would just be a fun exercise to kick off what will be a bunch of tutorials kind of around this. So hey, if you found value in this, do me a big favor, friends. Go ahead and leave me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and as always, happy coding.